Hey guys, Will here. So as we draw 2021 to a close, I wanted to spend a moment today to reflect on some of the interesting things that have happened in 2021, as well as look forward to some of the things that I'm personally excited for in 2022. Now, my list, of course, isn't going to be exactly the same as yours, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion down in the comments below with you guys and finding out what you guys are looking forward to in sim racing in 2022. So let's get stuck into it. So I'm sure most of you will agree that 2021 hasn't really played out the way a lot of us expected it to, at least in terms of sim racing hardware. So for me, and I'm sure most people would agree, the biggest launch that happened in 2021 with regards to hardware at least was the FANATEC CSL DD and the more recently released GT DD Pro. So those were those were teased back on April Fool's Day with the I think they called it the DD 0.5 from memory, and people kind of thought, well, there's no way that's going to release at that price, and then it ended up happening, and then pre-orders blew out, and it's just been a crazy time in terms of, you know, it was supposed to be a year that sim racing hardware, direct drive technology became more accessible for people because it was going to become so much cheaper, and then it ended up being less accessible than ever because even if you could afford it, you couldn't get it. So it's just been a crazy year in that regard, and we've seen, you know, pre-order times, wait times for a lot of big brands, not only FANATEC blow out to, you know, numbers of months. The tech industry's really suffered as well, PC hardware. I know a lot of the really big tech channels on YouTube have really struggled this year because people just get upset when they do builds, and it's just been a really difficult year in the tech space as a whole, not only just in sim racing. So yeah, the way it was meant to play out in terms of, you know, this hardware becoming more accessible, although it became more affordable, it didn't necessarily actually end up becoming more accessible. And look, to be honest with you guys, I've been keeping a pretty close eye on what's going on in terms of component shortages and logistical issues. And it just doesn't seem like there's really any end to it in sight at the moment. So I think the next couple of years are probably going to be a lot of, you know, adapting to the new landscape, changing the way companies handle logistics, you know, potentially seeing new factories started up for building ICs and things like that. We've seen this massive move towards globalization over the last couple of decades, and I can imagine that things are probably going to start to swing back the other way, and we'll start to see more sort of local manufacturing and things like that happening just to alleviate the issues. But of course, that potentially ends up driving prices up. So it's really hard. I don't have a crystal ball. It's really hard to know exactly what's going to happen. So one of the unfortunate side effects of the current situation that we find ourselves in with long wait times for hardware is that, you know, unless we have pre-orders where people are actually putting money down and then waiting for months and months and months to actually get their hands on the product, what ends up happening is cash flow starts to dry up for a lot of these companies, and that ultimately results in stalling of innovation. So companies can't afford to put more money into, you know, creating and developing new products if they can't get the components to actually sell those products. So one of the concerns that I do have for the next couple of years in particular, at least while we're dealing with the component shortages and shipping crisis, is that we may actually see a little bit of a slowdown in the tech industry in general. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I don't know whether, you know, companies are going to end up in a situation where they just simply can't afford to continue development and they have to just sort of, you know, just tread water effectively until this situation resolves itself. I just don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I was a little bit concerned that we might see a little bit of a slowdown in innovation over the next couple of years. But that's not to say that there won't still be some awesome developments, particularly in the digital space when it comes to, you know, things like games, updates for things like that, rather than just the hardware space specifically. So let's move on now and let's have a chat about some of the things that I'm looking forward to for 2022. So we've already seen the CSL DD and GT DD Pro release in 2021. We know that THRUSTMASTER is going to be releasing their direct drive wheelbase very soon as well. Don't know exactly when that's going to be. They did originally say it would be launching in 2021, but I don't know whether that was really sort of more related to the announcement rather than the actual availability of the product. I'm guessing it'll end up being somewhere around the launch of Gran Turismo 7, which at the moment at least is being talked about as being released in March of 2022. And I don't think they can afford to blow that launch out again. So I think that's probably pretty firm. But I think we're going to see a continuation along the lines of more products becoming available in this sort of entry-level direct drive space. So we know THRUSTMASTER's coming. We've seen some new products come out this year in relation to Moza as well, a brand new ecosystem. We've seen the Alpha Mini release as well. And it's sort of created a bit of a space around that sort of 5 to 8 Newton meter mark where the CSL-DD and GT-DD Pro sit currently, where, you know, there is space for more players in that entry level space where, you know, the price point to entry is a lot lower. So one big brand that we haven't seen anything from just yet is Logitech. Now, I've been sort of saying for quite some time now, well over a year, since the G923 launched, that I think that they will be releasing some sort of a direct drive wheelbase, or at least something to compete at that more mid to high end level. You know, something around the sort of CSL DD, maybe up to the sort of Alpha Mini range. So somewhere between 5 Newton meters and 15 Newton meters. Now, I don't have a crystal ball here. Once again, I don't know what they're planning. But to me, when the Logitech G923 launched back in 2020 or late 2020, they put so much marketing effort in behind TrueForce, which was the technology which allowed, you know, more detailed force feedback effects. And basically there was a new API that was actually developed for TrueForce, which had to be integrated into a lot of games. So obviously there was a massive amount of development work that went into that. There was a lot of marketing spend as well. If you remember back, they had Fernando Alonso actually advertising the G923 and TrueForce more specifically. And a lot of people joked around about TrueForce, and I think it was just simply down to, you know, the implementation not being what people had hoped it would be in the context of a G923, which was essentially very similar, if not the same, as the you know, the G920 and even the G25 and G27 and G29s. So if you go back and have a look at the review video that we did of the G923, we actually did a side-by-side comparison and teardown with the G920, and there wasn't a huge amount of difference on the hardware level, at least between the two of them, if any, when it came to the actual mechanical hardware, you know, gears and motors and things like that. So ever since that, I've kind of been thinking, I reckon that Logitech have something up their sleeve. Now, again, I don't know, but it just seems strange to me that they'd go to all that effort to, you know, develop TrueForce, put all that effort into actually advertising TrueForce, and then not really have a product that takes full advantage of that technology. So I think that they might have something up their sleeve for the launch of Gran Turismo 7. We know that Gran Turismo 7 has blown out by quite a long amount of time. And I think that's the reason why we've seen quite a few companies stalling and not announcing or releasing anything. So I would not be at all surprised if we didn't see some sort of an entry to mid, maybe high-end direct drive wheelbase from Logitech. I just don't know. Maybe we'll see multiple products. Maybe we'll see an entry, a mid, and a high level. Who knows? But I'm pretty confident we're going to see something. So we'll have to stay tuned for that, but that is definitely something that I'm excited to see. And then the flow-on effect from that as well. We may see more products from THRUSTMASTER. We may see more new brands coming on board as well. So that's the first thing that I'm really excited for in 2022. Hopefully more lower cost of entry direct drive technology entering sim racing. So the next thing that I'm really pumped for in 2022 is the release of Gran Turismo 7. Not only because I anticipate it's going to be a pretty awesome game, but also I think that there will be a slew of sim racing hardware that will potentially be released around that as well, which we've already kind of touched upon. But GT7 specifically, it's going to be the first native release for PlayStation 5, so we should see a massive uplift in terms of graphics. We're also going to have 4K at 60 frames per second as well, 60 hertz, which will be amazing. So again, this is a 25th anniversary sort of style game as well. So I expect that there's going to be a lot of elements that people have loved throughout the generations of Gran Turismo, all kind of brought into that. They're saying that it's going to be as much about car culture as it is about racing as well. And that's something that does tend to be lacking quite a bit in the sim racing space. So I think if we can see some sort of a medley or a unison between that sort of culture and actual sim racing, kind of the elements that I suppose were missing a little bit from Forza Horizon 5 maybe, although that kind of captures car culture quite well, it lacks out on that sort of sim racing aspect of it. So I'm really excited to see what Gran Turismo 7 brings to the table, and also what kind of sim racing hardware ends up being released around that as well. So March 2022, I think, is going to be a really exciting time for sim racing. So next on my list is sim racing esports competitions gathering more momentum and more attention. So we've sort of started to see a bit of a transition towards this. Obviously, esports is an absolutely massive industry. You know, millions and millions and millions of dollars go into it, not to mention the prize pools. And, you know, sim racing is very much in its infancy in terms of esports compared to a lot of other titles like, you know, Dota and, you know, Counter-Strike and so forth. So there is a long way to go when it comes to the development of that. And we're starting to see some movement in that space. So to give you an example, ESE, which is a massive company within the wider esports series or wider esports industry, they recently acquired digitalmotorsports.com, which means, you know, obviously they are intending to do more and more and more when it comes into sim racing. And I think that, you know, that's just one little example well, not necessarily a little example, it's a big example, but that's just one example of where I think we're going to see, you know, sim racing really explode in that sense. Now, obviously in 2020, we saw sim racing replace real life motorsports for many series. So the Australian Supercars series, when they weren't able to race in real life, they did an esports series instead. We saw Formula One do a similar type thing as well. Similar with IndyCar as well, and many other series around the world. Many of them sort of relied upon sim racing to replace real life racing for quite some period of time. Now, that had its pros and cons in many senses. I think that, you know, generally speaking, when you try to replace real life motorsport with esports rather than, I guess, embracing the things that make esports its own sport and under its own merit, that's where things tend to fall over. And what I've noticed in 2021 is that a lot of these real life series have started to actually embrace sim racing esports and, you know, create concurrent series or series that run in the off season and so forth. So I think we're going to see a continuation of that in 2022, and that's something that I'm really excited for. Really, you know, seeing sim racing as a genuine, more respected esport in general, and I guess just generally seeing sim racing being accepted as a genuine form of esports, which, while not exactly the same as real life motorsport, you know, a genuine skill and a genuine sport in and of itself. We've also seen sim racing cross over into the real life motorsport scene in the form of things like sponsorship as well. So the FANATEC GT World Challenge is an example. So I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of thing happening. And that is, you know, that is absolutely fantastic for sim racing because it means that there's more eyes on the sport and it just further helps to legitimize sim racing as its own form of esports. That's something that I'm definitely really excited to see a continuation of in 2022. So next on my list is more unified sim racing ecosystems when it comes to hardware. Now, this is an area that FANATEC have really dominated for, in my opinion, far too long. You know, there's no reason why other companies like SIMUCUBE, for example, can't, you know, nail this a lot better than they have done historically. So what I mean by this is FANATEC have a range of different products that all work together. They work across console, they work across PC, and it's a very plug and play Apple kind of style ecosystem where everything just works, at least for the most part. And we just haven't really seen any other companies come to the table with, you know, quite such a detailed and, you know, all-encompassing ecosystem. THRUSTMASTER do quite well. Obviously, Logitech have a couple of products as well that work together quite nicely too. But something that I'm sure we are going to see really come to fruition in 2022 is this becoming more of a focus for sim racing companies. So to give you a couple of examples of this that have happened already, SimMagic, who historically were only making wheels and wheelbases, they've now got a pedal set, they've got a shifter as well. And, you know, SIMUCUBE now are releasing wheels as well. They just released their Taco wheel a couple of months ago, which we'll be checking out very soon on the channel. We've seen brand new companies come out like Moza Sim Racing, which we checked out recently on the channel. They came out with a complete ecosystem. And of course, Acertech Sim Sports as well. They're one that I'm really excited for in 2022. Obviously, we reviewed the pre-production version of their Invicta pedals just recently. We've been really, really impressed with those. We know they have a wheelbase and a bunch of other stuff coming. If you saw our interview video that we did with Andre Eriksson, the CEO of Acertech, he basically shared his vision for having a complete ecosystem, including rigs, motion systems, you name it. They want to do absolutely everything, and they want to make it as simple as possible to use. So that is definitely something that I think, you know, outside of THRUSTMASTER and FANATEC in particular, has really been lacking in sim racing up to this point, and that is definitely something that I think we're going to start to see transition and become a lot more easy moving forward. So there are some pros and cons to that. Obviously, you know, having complete ecosystems like that does make it a lot easier when buying equipment, because it makes it a lot easier to just choose stuff that you know is going to be compatible. But it does potentially keep you locked out of other ecosystems as well. One of the things that is great about sim racing is you do have the ability to choose different hardware from different manufacturers depending on what's going to suit your needs best. And for the most part, at least, most of it is all kind of cross-compatible. So particularly if you're running on a PC, you can kind of just plug everything in. You may have to deal with lots of different drivers and things like that if you're running lots of different brands, but for the most part, everything kind of just works together in unison, at least, you know, at some level. What I hope we don't see as a result of these ecosystems being released is that they, you know, become way too locked out, and, you know, if you have a wheelbase, you can't use other pedals with that wheelbase and so forth. Now, I don't really see that being a problem on PC so much, and that's definitely something that I think the sim racing community needs to be aware of and needs to make sure we keep these brands accountable. We definitely don't want to see situations arising where you're completely locked out of using other manufacturers' hardware just because you happen to choose a particular brand's wheelbase or something like that. So definitely something that we all need to keep the industry accountable for. So the last couple of years has very much been around miniaturization and accessibility of hardware. So we've seen things like direct drive technology in particular become more affordable, you know, smaller, easier to run, easier to integrate into your system. But beyond that, we haven't actually seen a whole lot of genuine innovation when it comes to new technologies within the sim racing space. Everything's kind of, I guess, just been, you know, a next generation of things that already existed. So one thing that I am very excited to see in 2022 is force feedback or haptic pedals. And I'm not talking about vibration motors, which we have seen around for quite some time now, but I'm talking about genuine force feedback. So actuators that actually pump the pedal and allow you to feel things like ABS kicking in. Now, SimTag, in collaboration with D-Box, did have a demonstration of this setup at the ADAC conference just recently. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend that conference because of lockdowns, so I didn't get to try them out for myself. But that is probably the most innovative product that I saw, and one of the only genuinely innovative products, in my opinion at least, that we saw at that conference. So that is something that I'm really excited to see in 2022. Now, I know that the initial release from SimTag and D-Box is going to be quite expensive, so the barrier to entry is going to be quite high. But whenever we see new products like that come out, obviously other companies start to look at ways, or even the companies themselves start to look at ways that that can become cheaper and more accessible to the masses. And I know that there's already at least a couple of other sim racing companies, which I can't name unfortunately, that are looking at doing their own systems with regards to that. And you know, we've talked about this on the channel so many times before. Pedals really are such a fundamental thing when it comes to driving quickly and consistently. So a genuine innovation within that space, I think, is something that is very exciting for sim racing, and definitely something that I'm looking forward to unpacking in further detail. We will be reviewing that SimTag D-Box system as soon as we possibly can here at Boosted Media, so really looking forward to that. But I guess more so, I'm looking forward to seeing the continuation of that technology and that technology becoming more affordable and more accessible. And the reason for that is I think that is genuinely a technology that could revolutionize sim racing and add a new level of feedback which has been lacking up until this point. So that is my list of top 5 things that I'm looking forward to in 2022 when it comes to sim racing. Let me know again down in the comments what you guys are looking forward to. And yeah, I guess all that's left to say really is thank you so much, guys, for all the support that you've given us this year. It hasn't been an easy year in many ways, but we've kicked some massive goals. We've doubled our subscriber base, which is just incredible. And, you know, despite the challenges that all of us have faced this year, we've all pulled together, we've all grown as a community. And I think looking back, although it has had its challenges for everybody, it has been a pretty incredible year for sim racing. So looking forward to continuing in 2022. Thank you guys again for all your support in 2021. And yeah, we'll see you again very soon. Bye.